Walking into my mansion after 8 hours facing death in the emergency room, my own daughter didn't ask if I was alive. She casually raised her glass, announcing she'd sold my $4 million property for travel and her husband's business. She snapped, "Don't be selfish, Dad. We're just taking our inheritance early." I didn't get angry. Instead, I smiled knowingly. The traders instantly froze in utter confusion. "Why are you smiling?" I replied. "Because the company you sold my house to is actually—" This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we continue, drop a quick comment. What's the weather like where you are? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Quick note. Some details are fictionalized for storytelling. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental. The lesson is what matters most. When I walked through the back door of my Buckhead mansion, after 8 hours in the hospital, my daughter didn't ask if I was alive. She told me she'd already sold my house. I'm Clyde Webb, 60 years old, retired urban architect, with graying temples and hands that still don't shake even when they probably should. I gripped my leather briefcase tighter than necessary as I stepped into the marble foyer at 3 in the afternoon on December the 31st. The scent of champagne and expensive perfume hit me before I saw them. Jacinta stood by the wet bar in designer athleisure that cost more than most people's car payments. She's 35 now, my daughter, with perfectly highlighted hair catching the chandelier light. She looked at me the way you'd look at an inconvenient appointment that ran long. "Dad, you're back," she said. Not a question, statement of fact. Beside her stood Langston Valentine, my son-in-law, 38 years old, in a navy-tailored suit and Rolex that reflected light like a warning beacon. He adjusted his cufflinks and smirked at me while holding a crystal champagne flute. "Feeling better?" Langston asked, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care about the answer. I placed my briefcase on the chair by the door. My chest still ached from this morning. The hospital bracelet cut into my wrist. I'd refused to let them cut it off. "The Midtown house," Jacinta said, raising her glass slightly. "I sold it this morning, $4 million. Clean corporate acquisition." The words hung in the air like smoke. European travel suitcases sat stacked by the wet bar Louis Vuitton, Rimowa. The kind of luggage that announces its price before you touch it. They'd been planning this, celebrating it. "You sold my property," I said quietly. Jacinta set down her champagne glass with a delicate click against marble. "Dad, let's not be dramatic. When you die, the property's mine anyway. I'm just taking my inheritance early. Why wait? Langston needs capital for his investment fund, and I need Europe. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The words settled into my chest right where the pain had been 8 hours earlier. Langston stepped forward, champagne in hand, confidence radiating off him like cologne. "We closed at 10 this morning, quick clean corporate buyers, cash deal. You wouldn't understand the financial complexity, but trust me, I got you an excellent price." "You got me?" I repeated. He smiled. "Figure of speech." I said nothing. I looked at my daughter, the child I'd raised alone after her mother died. The girl I'd sent to private schools and college, the woman standing in my home, telling me she'd stolen my property while I was in an emergency room. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, because for 5 years I'd been building a trap, and my own daughter had just walked into it so perfectly that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You need to understand I'd been planning this for 5 years, and my own heart almost killed me before I could spring it. That morning at 7:23, I'd been alone in my private office reviewing the fund management system I'd built. The pain hit like a fist driving into my sternum. Real, undeniable, not part of any plan. I collapsed near my desk, one hand grabbing the edge to slow my fall. Cora's photograph watched from the wall. My wife gone 5 years now, her smile frozen in better times. The floor was cold against my cheek. My phone was across the room, but my computer screen was right there. The dead man's switch, a 2-layer system I'd built with Tate Morgan, was flashing red. The primary trigger was a 72-hour check-in timer, but the secondary trigger was the Apple Watch integration I'd added 18 months ago as a failsafe. My heart rate had dropped below 40. The secondary trigger had fired. The system wasn't waiting 72 hours. It was reading my vitals in real time, and right now, those vitals looked like a dying man's. Maybe I was. I managed to reach my phone, dialed the cardiologist's emergency line with shaking fingers. "Mr. Webb, stay calm," Dr. Bryce Hampton said, in that measured tone of someone who'd talked dozens of heart attack patients through their worst moments. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out. Don't move. Don't try to stand." But I wasn't looking at the phone anymore. I was looking at my screen. Small text blinked in the corner, transfer initiated. The trap had sprung itself. For 5 years I'd been gathering evidence, bank records, forged signatures, shell company registrations, every theft, every lie, every fraudulent transaction my daughter and her husband had committed, all of it encrypted, indexed, ready to deploy. The dead man's switch was sending it all to London right now. To my youngest son, Blaze, the one who'd rebuilt his life after Jacinta destroyed it. To Norwood Spencer, the attorney who'd helped me build this legal fortress. Every document, every bank record, every piece of evidence. Encrypting, transmitting, locking behind passwords only Blaze and I knew. Cora's photograph watched from the wall as I lay on that office floor, wondering if she'd forgive what I was about to do to our daughter. The ambulance arrived. Paramedics lifted me onto the gurney. Someone asked about my medications. Someone else checked my vitals. The world blurred into motion and fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. But before they carried me out, I managed one glance back at my office screen. Transfer complete. Receipt confirmed. The encryption had worked. Everything was already in London locked down waiting. As the ambulance doors closed and the siren wailed, I closed my eyes and breathed freely for the first time in 5 years. Now standing in my foyer at 3 in the afternoon, watching my daughter celebrate stealing my property, I knew exactly what was waiting for her. The system had armed itself. The trap was set, and she had no idea what was coming. The trap had been set 5 years ago. What Jacinta didn't know was that I'd watched her spring it. 9 minutes after the ambulance carried me away that morning, my bedroom security camera captured my daughter walking through my door. I reviewed the footage later from my hospital bed, watching Jacinta move through my private space with the confidence of someone who believed she was alone. She went straight to my desk. The locked drawer took her 30 seconds to jimmy, open with a letter opener. Her hands moved efficiently through files past bank statements, past legal documents she didn't bother reading. She knew exactly what she was looking for. My expired Georgia driver's license. 2 years out of date, but the photograph was recent enough. Got it, she said aloud to the empty room, holding the card up to the light. Expired 2 years ago, but the photo's still him. This is all we need. Sherman, he said into the phone, not bothering with pleasantries. I need that appraisal done by noon. Midtown property? Yes, I'll make it worth your time. What Langston didn't know was that Sherman had been on my payroll for 2 years, specifically for this moment. Every fraudulent document he signed with sweating palms, his other hand photographed for Norwood Spencer. I'll have the paperwork ready, Sherman said on the recording, his voice steady despite what I knew he was feeling. Bring the ID to my office by 10:30. The call ended. Jacinta slipped my driver's license into her purse like it was a credit card she'd borrowed. Vanguard Holdings, my company, the one I'd built specifically to catch this exact transaction. They walked out of my bedroom carrying the identity they'd stolen, heading to forge documents that would transfer my property into their names. The camera timestamp read 9:23 a.m., December 31st. By 10:45, Sherman had called Norwood Spencer with photographs of every signature, every forged initial, every fraudulent claim on the quitclaim deed. You might wonder why a man with a fresh heart attack would choose this moment to destroy his daughter. Let me show you what she doesn't know about the woman in this photograph. She started this. Not Jacinta, not Langston. Shell companies with luxury brand names, forged sponsorship contracts, money laundering disguised as influencer income. Cora had built it all to give Jacinta everything we couldn't afford, honestly. And when the weight of it killed her 5 years ago, when she left that suicide letter confessing everything I'd faced a choice. Protect her memory by letting Jacinta continue the fraud, or expose it all and destroy the daughter she'd sacrificed herself trying to save. I'd chosen option 3, build a trap so perfect that when Jacinta finally walked into it, the evidence would be undeniable and the justice automatic. My phone rang. London number. Dad, Blaze said. My youngest son. 28 years old now, calling from his Vanguard Holdings office 5 time zones away. His voice carried the calm I'd taught him to maintain even when everything was falling apart. The system worked perfectly. Every file's encrypted and locked. I'm ready when you are. The property transfer went through. 10 minutes ago, Jacinta signed the documents transferring your Midtown mansion to Vanguard Holdings for payment in full. She thinks she just stole $4 million. He paused. She has no idea Vanguard is ours. I looked at Cora's photograph. Her eyes stared back the same eyes Jacinta had inherited, along with the belief that family loyalty meant taking whatever you could carry. "You started this to give her everything," I said quietly to the photo, knowing Blaze could hear me on the line. "Now, I have to take it all away to save what's left of our family." "Dad," Blaze asked, "are you sure about this?" Was I sure I'd spent 5 years building this system? 5 years gathering evidence? 5 years watching my daughter spiral deeper into the fraud her mother had started? 5 years waiting for the moment she'd go too far? And now she'd committed identity theft and property fraud while I was in an emergency room. Yes, I was sure. "Forgive me, Cora," I said aloud to the empty hospital room. "But our daughter needs to learn what you tried to teach her too late." I folded the photograph back into my wallet, placed it in my vest pocket right over my damaged heart. Dr. Hampton cleared me to leave at 2:30 with warnings about stress management and rest. He handed me a prescription for beta blockers and a stern lecture about avoiding emotional confrontation. I thanked him and signed the discharge papers. Then I stood at the hospital room mirror, adjusting my tie with hands steadier than they'd been in 5 years. The reflection showed a man who'd just survived a heart attack. But what it didn't show was the trap that had been springing itself all day while I lay in this bed. Sherman had photographed every fraudulent signature. Norwood had received every piece of evidence. Blaze had secured every encrypted file in London. The property transferred to Vanguard Holdings. My company was complete and legal. Jacinta thought she'd stolen $4 million. What she'd actually done was commit federal wire fraud with a paper trail so perfect that even the FBI wouldn't need more than 5 minutes to build their case. I picked up my leather briefcase from the chair. Inside were the documents I'd need for tonight, the ones that would show my daughter exactly what happened when you stole from your father while he was dying. Dr. Hampton had no idea the most dangerous thing for my heart was waiting in my own living room. By the time I walked through that back door at 3 o'clock, Jacinta and Langston would have 8 hours to feel invincible. 8 hours to celebrate. 8 hours to believe they'd won. Then I was going to show them what 5 years of patience looked like when it finally stopped waiting. Langston hadn't finished his explanation. He'd been speaking for 4 full minutes without pause, each sentence more condescending than the last terms like fiduciary optimization and equity reallocation and cross-collateral positioning delivered with the rehearsed authority of someone who'd practiced them specifically to make a 60-year-old man feel too ignorant to ask questions. I let him finish. "You need to understand something about arrogant men. They never look at the documents carefully when they think they've already won." I walked past them to the leather armchair facing the coffee table, sat down slowly, letting my briefcase rest on my lap. The Italian marble floor felt cool beneath my shoes. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta's December afternoon light was fading toward evening. Langston was still talking. Something about how the corporate veil protected personal liability. How Vanguard Holdings had immediate liquidity that I as an individual could never access. How they'd done me a favor by executing this transaction while I was incapacitated. I opened my briefcase. The click of the brass latches cut through his monologue. He paused mid-sentence, watching me, with the first flicker of uncertainty I'd seen cross his face all day. I removed a thick red folder, placed it on the glass coffee table between us. The folder was heavy with documentation, official state records, embossed seals, notarized signatures. "Before you continue," I said quietly, "I think you should look at these." Jacinta's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. Langston set his flute down on the marble coaster, trying to maintain his confident posture. I slid the folder across the table. Langston opened it. The first page was Georgia Secretary of State business registration documents, Vanguard Holdings LLC, Articles of Organization, the official seal raised and embossed, impossible to fake. He started reading. I watched his eyes move across the text, watched the exact moment comprehension hit. His face drained of color like someone had opened a valve. "The company you sold my Midtown property to this morning." I said, my voice that carrying the calm I'd practiced for 5 years. "Vanguard Holdings is registered in my name. Has been for 3 years. You can verify the seal." Langston's hands started shaking. The pages rustled. "Managing member?" He read aloud, his voice faltering on each word. "Clyde Webb, ownership percentage 100%. Effective date January 2023. The Georgia Secretary of State seal was raised, embossed, professionally executed, and Langston's hands were trembling so badly the papers nearly slipped from his fingers. Jacinta grabbed the documents from him, scanned them with growing panic. That's not possible. You can't, Dad, you don't even understand how corporations work. I understand perfectly, I said. You used my stolen identity to sell my property to my company. Then you took the money from that transaction money that never left my accounts and believed you'd committed the perfect theft. Langston stepped backward. His polished shoes found the wet spot where champagne had spilled earlier. He caught himself against the wet bar. This morning at 10:45, I continued. You transferred title of my Midtown mansion to an LLC I created 3 years ago, specifically for this purpose. Sherman Hayes appraised it. You signed the quitclaim deed using my forged signature. The money went into Vanguard Holdings account, which I control. The champagne flute slipped from Langston's fingers. Crystal exploded against Italian marble, the sound sharp and final. 1,000 pieces scattered across the floor, catching the fading afternoon light like diamonds. Dom Perignon pooled between the shards, spreading in a pale gold stain toward the Persian rug. Langston stared at the registration documents in Jacinta's hands, read my name over and over as if repetition would change reality. Impossible! He whispered the word barely audible over the drip of expensive champagne hitting stone. But Jacinta wasn't ready to accept defeat, not yet. Langston forced his spine straight, stepping away from the shattered crystal on the marble floor. Stripped of his fake confidence, he resorted to the only weapon he had left: corporate jargon. This doesn't change the execution, he stammered, his voice straining for authority. A cross-collateral clause allows automatic trust reallocation when primary guarantors retain implicit fiduciary rights. The transaction holds valid regardless of Vanguard's internal ownership structure. Jacinta moved beside him, nodding like she understood what he'd just said. See, Dad, this is complex corporate law. You retired before these structures even existed. Let the professionals handle this. I remained seated in the leather armchair, my briefcase still open on the glass table. The red folder with Vanguard Holdings documentation sat between us like evidence at a trial. There is no cross-collateral clause in Georgia quitclaim law, Langston, I said quietly. And you're not a trustee, you're a thief using words you don't understand. His jaw tightened. You're oversimplifying. Modern corporate structures operate within recursive liability frameworks. The deed transfer initiated a cascade protocol that sold both, and in these doing the mirrors. Stop, I said. He stopped. Define cascade protocol. Silence. The champagne bubbles in his glass were the only sound in the room. Define recursive liability framework. More silence. Jacinta looked at her husband, waiting for him to explain. He stared at his champagne. You can't, I said, because you're making it up. Those aren't legal terms. They're noise designed to make people feel too stupid to question you. Langston's face flushed red. I'm a certified financial officer. You're a CFO at a mid-sized real estate firm, I interrupted. You handle spreadsheets and investment accounts. You don't practice law, and you certainly don't understand property transfers well enough to steal a house without leaving evidence. Jacinta stepped forward. Dad, you're being deliberately obtuse. Langston studied at Wharton. He knows what he's talking about. Wharton teaches business, not criminal law. I leaned forward slightly. Let me explain what actually happened this morning, using real legal terminology instead of invented jargon. Langston gripped his champagne tighter. You forged my signature on a quitclaim deed, I said. That's identity theft, a federal crime. You transferred property title without owner consent fraud. You used my stolen driver's license as verification, another count of identity theft. Then, you accepted payment from a company you believed was independent when it's actually owned by the victim of your theft. That's wire fraud. Here's what you need to know about men who use corporate jargon as weapons. They collapse the moment you ask them to define their own terms. Langston set his second champagne flute down on the marble coaster, pulled out his phone, started scrolling with shaking fingers. The transaction went through legal channels. Sherman Hayes appraised it. The title company verified everything. You can't just... This Sherman Hayes works for me, I said. His scrolling stopped. Oh, has for 2 years. Every document he signed today he photographed and sent to my attorney before you left his office. The title company accepted falsified identification because that's what title companies do when licensed appraisers submit paperwork that appears legitimate. They don't verify, they process. Jacinta's face had gone pale. You're lying. Sherman wouldn't... Call him, I said. Ask him who signed his retainer agreement in 2023. She didn't move. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out another folder: bank records, wire transfer receipts, transaction logs with timestamps and account numbers. "The 500,000 you wired this morning," I said, sliding the papers across the table. "Where did it come from, Langston? Because I know it came from Melvin Garrison's retirement account." The color drained completely from his face. "That was temporary operational capital," he stammered. "A standard bridge loan? That was federal wire fraud." I tapped the bank records. "Melvin Garrison's Oak Creek Trust Retirement Fund. 35 years of Delta Airlines payroll deductions. You withdrew $500,000 2 weeks ago and claimed it was for corporate restructuring. Then you used that stolen money to execute a fraudulent property transfer. The number 500,000 hung in the air between us, each digit another year of Melvin's factory wages stolen to fund a champagne toast." Jacinta grabbed the bank records, scanned them. Her hands were shaking now, too. "Langston, you said that you told me it was from your investment fund." "It was a temporary reallocation," he said, voice rising. "Operational necessity. I was going to replace it before anyone noticed." "You stole retirement money." I said, my voice still calm, still measured. "You used it to buy stolen property, and you created a digital trail that leads straight to a federal prison cell." I pulled out the final page from the folder. Wire transfer confirmation. Sender Oak Creek, trust account ending in 4782, registered to Melvin Garrison. Recipient Vanguard, Holdings LLC operating account. Amount $500,000. Date December 31st, 2025, 10:47 a.m. Timestamped, documented, impossible to deny. "You see the beauty of what you've done?" I asked. "By selling the house to Vanguard, you didn't just fail to steal my property. You created an unbreakable evidence chain: forged signature, stolen identity, fraudulent deed money, laundering wire fraud across state lines. All documented, all time-stamped, all with digital receipts." Langston had been gripping his second champagne flute the entire time, holding it like a lifeline, while I explained how thoroughly he'd destroyed himself. When I said the word receipts, his fingers went slack. No one moved to clean it up. We all just stood there watching expensive champagne pool around the evidence of federal crimes. But there was one more document in my briefcase, and this one had Jacinta's voice on it. My daughter stepped over the broken glass and looked me straight in the eye with the confidence of someone who thought verbal confessions disappeared into thin air the moment they were spoken. "You have no proof of anything I said, Dad." Her voice was steady now, calculating. "It was just us talking. No witnesses, no recordings, nothing you can use." Langston remained frozen by the wet bar, staring at the bank records spread across the coffee table. But Jacinta had recovered her composure. She crossed her arms and lifted her chin, the same gesture she'd used since childhood, when caught in a lie. "Everything you've shown us is circumstantial," she continued. "Sherman Hayes could claim anything. Those bank records could be doctored. The Vanguard Holdings documents could be fake. But what I said when you walked through that door, that's just your word against mine." She smiled, actually smiled. "And in court, Dad, it's always going to come down to credibility. A 60-year-old man with a fresh heart attack versus his successful daughter and her CFO husband. Who do you think they'll believe? Ops, und dann noisias." I let her finish. Let her build that confidence back up brick by brick. Then I pointed to the custom bookshelf along the far wall. "That small green light," I said quietly. "Behind the third shelf. Do you see it?" Her eyes followed my gesture, found the tiny LED indicator blinking softly between the leather-bound volumes. "Smart home system," I explained. "Voice-activated, motion-triggered, cloud-integrated. Professional installation. Completely legal under Georgia single-party consent law, since I'm the homeowner, and I consented to recording everything said in my own house." The smile faded from her face. "It's been recording every word spoken in this room for 3 years, I continued. "Since the day after your mother's funeral, every conversation, every phone call, every toast and celebration and private discussion you thought was safe because it was family." Jacinta's arms uncrossed. "You're lying?" "At precisely 3:02 p.m. today." I said, pulling a printed transcript from my briefcase. "You said, and I quote, 'When you die, the property's mine anyway. I'm just taking my inheritance early. Why wait? Langston needs capital for his investment fund, and I need Europe. Don't be selfish." I slid the transcript across the table, time-stamped, word for word, her exact phrasing. Every syllable, I said. Recorded, time-stamped, encrypted, and automatically uploaded to Norwood Spencer's secure cloud server before you finished your champagne. Langston finally moved, walked to the bookshelf, stared at the green LED like it was a snake. That's been there for 3 years. Since June 2023, I confirmed. The day after Cora's funeral, the day I realized what I was dealing with. You might think it's paranoid to record your own family until you remember my wife started committing fraud in this very room 14 years ago. Jacinta grabbed the transcript, read her own words printed in black and white. Her hands started shaking. "This isn't admissible," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "You can't just record people without—" "Georgia is a one-party consent state," I interrupted. "I'm the property owner. I consented. That makes every recording completely legal. And since you committed crimes in my house on my property while I was present, every word you said is admissible evidence of criminal intent." The transcript trembled in her fingers. "But it gets better," I said. "The system doesn't just record. It analyzes, uses voice recognition algorithms to flag specific keywords. Inheritance, die, sell the house. Every time you and Langston discussed your plans, every whispered strategy session, every champagne celebration, every phone call where you thought you were safe, the system flagged it, encrypted it, and sent it to my attorney's server." Langston sank onto the sofa. The color had drained completely from his face. 3 years of recordings, I continued. Conversations about forging signatures, discussions about which properties to steal first, planning sessions where you calculated how long I'd probably live and whether it was worth waiting. All of it documented, all of it time-stamped, all of it encrypted and backed up to 3 separate cloud servers. The green LED had been blinking in that bookshelf since the day Cora died, a silent witness to every lie Jacinta told in the years since her mother's funeral. Jacinta's eyes moved from the transcript to the bookshelf to my face. "You've been watching us, listening to us, recording us, for 3 years. I've been protecting evidence," I said. "There's a difference." "You set a trap," she whispered. "You built this whole system, Vanguard Holdings, Sherman Hayes, the recordings, you built all of it just to catch us." "I built it to protect the family," I corrected, "from you." She backed away from the bookshelf like it had grown teeth. Her eyes were wide now, pupils dilated with something that looked like genuine fear.
"Who are you, Dad?"
The question hung in the air between us, not rhetorical, not angry, genuinely confused, as if she was looking at a stranger wearing her father's face. I'd lived in this house for 35 years, raised her in these rooms, taught her to walk on this marble floor, celebrated her birthdays, her graduation, her wedding in this exact living room. And she'd never once suspected that the man who smiled at family dinners was also the man who spent 5 years building a surveillance system to document her crimes. "I'm your father," I said quietly, "and I'm protecting what's left of our family from what you've become." The doorbell rang. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. 3 chimes, bright and cheerful, announcing visitors at the front entrance. Jacinta's head snapped toward the sound. "Who is that?" The doorbell rang again. Then voices outside, multiple voices laughing, calling New Year's Eve, greetings to each other. "In that," I said, standing from my armchair and straightening my vest, "is the rest of our family. 20 relatives expecting a celebration." I walked toward the entrance hall, leaving Jacinta and Langston, standing among broken crystal and spilled champagne and evidence of federal crimes. "It's time to show them what you've done," I said over my shoulder. The doorbell rang a 3rd time, and through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes gathering on the front steps. Chapter 2 ends here with my daughter asking who I am and 20 witnesses about to walk through the door. Fear is a temporary emotion. It only lasts until desperate people remember they still have weapons. And my daughter's favorite weapon had always been my dead wife's memory. The doorbell rang a 4th time, voices gathering outside, but Jacinta's face had already transformed. The fear I'd seen moments earlier, when she asked who I was, that vanished like smoke. In its place came something harder, angrier. "What kind of father are you?" she said, her voice rising to carry over the doorbell chimes. "You don't trap your own daughter with recordings and legal tricks. You don't turn your own family into criminals." I walked past her toward the entrance hall. Through the frosted glass, I could see relatives arriving, holding covered dishes and wine bottles, expecting celebration. I opened the door just wide enough to speak. "Give me 10 minutes," I said to my sister Henrietta, who stood at the front of the group. There's something I need to handle first. She looked past me, seeing the broken glass on the floor, the tension in the air, nodded slowly. We'll wait in the garden. I closed the door and turned back to the living room. Jacinta had moved to the center of the room, standing in the space where champagne and crystal shards still littered the marble. Langston remained by the wet bar, silent, his earlier confidence completely gone. "Mom would be ashamed of you," Jacinta said, and there it was, Cora's name weaponized like a blade, setting traps for your own daughter, recording us like criminals, treating us like we're strangers instead of family. She said my wife's name like a shield, like my grief would make me weak enough to forget what our daughter had become. "This property," she continued, gesturing at the mansion around us, "all of it Mom helped build with you. She raised me in these houses. I have every right to what's mine by family, by blood. That's what Mom believed. That's what she taught me." Her voice broke on the word taught, perfectly calculated to sound like grief instead of manipulation. "You're dishonoring her memory," Jacinta said, taking a step toward me. "She'd hate what you're doing. She'd hate seeing you destroy our family over money. Mom always said family came first. Always." Cora's name on my daughter's lips felt like a knife. My wife had been dead 5 years. But Jacinta was using her memory like currency, spending it to buy freedom from her own crimes. I walked back to my briefcase, pulled out a stack of yellowed papers, aged and creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. Foreclosure notices, default warnings, bank statements, all dated exactly 5 years ago. "You want to talk about what your mother taught you?" I asked quietly. "Let's talk about March 2020. Jacinta's face went still. I held up the first document. "This is a mortgage application for my Midtown property. Second mortgage $1.8 million. Filed March 15th, 2020. I placed it on the coffee table beside the broken glass. "Notice the signature," I said. "That's supposed to be mine, but I never signed this document, never authorized this loan, never even knew it existed until the default notices started arriving." Langston had gone pale again. Jacinta stood frozen. "My social security number." I continued, pulling out the next page. "My credit history, my property deed, all used without my knowledge or consent to secure nearly $2 million from First National Bank." I spread the documents across the table like cards in a losing hand. "The loan went into default after 6 months, I said. "The bank sent notices to my address, notices that mysteriously never reached me because someone was intercepting my mail. When they finally called me directly about the delinquent payments in September 2020, I had no idea what they were talking about." March 2020. I remembered that month because it was 2 months before Cora died, and my wife had looked me in the eye and helped our daughter forge my signature. Jacinta's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You used my stolen identity to mortgage my property." I continued, my voice still calm, still measured. "Then you took that money, $1.8 million, and used it as a down payment to buy this mansion. The Buckhead estate. The house we're standing in right now." Langston finally found his voice. "That was the bank approved. We had proper documentation." "You had forged documentation," I corrected. "My signature, my social security number, my credit. All stolen, all falsified, all federal crimes." I picked up the foreclosure notice, the official seal of First National Bank embossed at the top. "When the mortgage went into default," I said, "the bank started foreclosure proceedings. They would have seized my Midtown property to cover your debt. $2 million you stole and spent, and I would have lost my house paying for it." Jacinta was shaking her head, but she still wasn't speaking. "That was Mom was still alive then," she finally whispered. "She helped us. She said it was okay. Your mother," I said quietly, "committed fraud, and she taught you to do the same." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. I pointed at the custom crown molding running along the ceiling, the imported Italian marble beneath our feet, the crystal chandelier that cost more than most people earned in a year. "This house," I said, slowly letting each word land like a hammer, "was bought with $1.8 million borrowed in my name on my credit using my forged signature. Every room, every fixture, every piece of custom millwork." I gestured at the walls around us. "You're standing in a mansion purchased with money stolen from me." Jacinta looked around the living room like she was seeing it for the first time. The color drained from her face until she was absolutely white. Her eyes moved from the chandelier to the floors to the windows to my face. "But that's not the worst part," I said, "because the worst part was that I own this house too. The horror on my daughter's face lasted exactly 7 seconds before she realized something worse if the mansion was bought with stolen money. Who owned the debt now? You said worst part, Jacinta whispered. What's the worst part? I pulled another document from my briefcase. Bank purchase agreement. Distressed debt acquisition. The letterhead read, Vanguard Holdings, LLC. When you defaulted on the mortgage, I said the bank classified it as bad debt, non-performing asset. They wanted it off their books. Langston's eyes went wide. No. 3 years ago, I continued. Vanguard Holdings bought your defaulted mortgage from First National Bank. Pennies on the dollar. Standard distressed debt purchase. I placed the acquisition document on the table beside the foreclosure notices. I own the debt on both properties now, I said. The Midtown Mansion and this Buckhead estate. Every brick, every fixture, every custom detail you think belongs to you. Jacinta grabbed the document, read it. Her hands shook so badly the paper rattled. Both, she said. You own this house too. I own the mortgage debt, I corrected. Which means I'm the legal creditor. And since you're still in default, haven't made a payment in 3 years, I have every right to foreclose and evict. A heavy knock interrupted the silence. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see a tall silhouette holding what looked like a portfolio. I walked to the entrance and opened the door. Norwood Spencer, 55 years old, stood in his charcoal suit with a sleek leather portfolio under one arm. His presence carried the kind of ice-cold authority that made courtrooms go quiet when he entered. The documents he carried bore the raised blue seal of federal court. Mr. Webb, he said. The federal court order came through. Judge Whitmore signed 30 minutes ago. He stepped inside, nodded politely to Jacinta and Langston, like they were strangers at a business meeting, and placed his portfolio on the entrance table. This is Norwood Spencer, I said. My attorney. He's been handling the legal framework for everything you've seen today. Norwood Spencer wasn't just my legal counsel. He was the executioner of this strategy. I hired him because he operates strictly on cold, hard statutes unmoved by emotional manipulation or family tears. Jacinta found her voice again. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something uglier. Rage. What kind of father are you? She advanced toward me, her face flushed red. You just had a heart attack this morning. You're 60 years old alone, and you spend your time destroying your own daughter. She gestured wildly at the documents scattered across the coffee table. Oh, Mom's been dead 5 years, and you've turned into this monster who builds legal traps for his own family. What's wrong with you? Her voice cracked on the word monster, perfectly calculated to sound like genuine emotion instead of manipulation. You're sick, she continued. Literally sick. Your heart is failing. You're going to die alone because you chose revenge over family. Was it worth it? Dad was destroying me, worth dying alone. She used my heart attack like a weapon, my age, like an insult. My grief like ammunition, everything except the one word that would have saved her. Sorry. Langston rallied beside her, finding his corporate voice again. This is entrapment, clear prosecutorial misconduct. You deliberately set financial traps designed to... I set nothing, I interrupted. I owned companies, legal entities. You walked in and stole from them using forged documents and stolen identity. There's a difference. Norwood opened his portfolio and pulled out a stamped document. This is a temporary restraining order from the Northern District of Georgia Federal Court, signed by Judge Eleanor Marsh at 4:47 p.m. Today, he said. He placed the official order on the table. The court has frozen all assets inside this property pending fraud investigation. Nothing leaves this house, no furniture, no electronics, no jewelry, no documents. As the creditor of record on both mortgages, Vanguard Holdings has been appointed custodian of all assets during the investigation period. He produced a second document. This is a formal notice of voluntary vacate agreement. Jacinta, as part of the terms negotiated for your suspended sentence, you agreed to vacate this property within 72 hours. The formal dispossessory hearing is scheduled for January 15th. But you've already signed the cooperation agreement, so this is a formality. You have until January 3rd at midnight. Jacinta grabbed the order, read it. Her face went from red to white. 72 hours! Her voice climbed toward panic. On New Year's Eve. Wandem Ios. January 3rd, 11:59 p.m. Norwood said. The court found continued occupation of property purchased with documented fraud. Proceeds constitutes ongoing civil harm to the creditor. Emergency motion was granted on that basis. Fulton County Sheriff's deputies will execute the writ after the deadline. Langston was reading over Jacinta's shoulder, his lips moving as he scanned the legal language. This can't be legal. You can't just emergency evictions require proof of immediate danger. Federal wire fraud, Norwood said, without inflection. Identity theft, mortgage fraud, money laundering. Judge Whitmore deemed the continued occupation of fraudulently obtained property to constitute ongoing criminal activity, which qualifies for emergency removal. He pulled out another page, highlighted sections in yellow. You're standing in a house purchased with proceeds from federal crimes, Norwood continued. The court considers your presence here to be evidence tampering since you have access to documents and communications that might be destroyed before law enforcement can secure them. The legal machinery was beautiful in its precision, every clause designed years ago for this exact moment. Jacinta looked at me with something close to hatred. You planned this, all of it. The companies, the surveillance, the timing. You planned to destroy us. I planned to protect the family, I said, from you. Norwood placed a second stack of documents on the table beside the eviction order. These were thicker, older looking, with multiple tabs and highlighted sections. Langston stared at them with the dawning horror of someone who'd just realized the trap went deeper than he'd imagined. There's more, Jacinta whispered. Norwood looked at me. I nodded once. Let's show them the next episode, I said, because Sherman Hayes wasn't the only person who'd been working for me all along. Norwood opened the thicker file and pulled out a photograph Sherman Hayes signing the fraudulent appraisal this morning at 10:47, his other hand holding a cell phone pointed directly at the forged documents. The image was crystal clear, time-stamped, every signature visible, every forged initial captured in high resolution. Langston stared at the photo like it was a snake, at Sherman Hayes. Norwood said, his voice carrying that courtroom precision, has been on Mr. Webb's payroll for 2 years, placed in that appraisal firm in January 2023, specifically to wait for this transaction. He laid out more photographs, Sherman accepting the bribe money from Langston, Sherman scanning the expired driver's license, Sherman photographing the wire transfer confirmation. Every document you gave him, Norwood continued, he photographed and transmitted to me within 10 minutes of signing. Expired ID serial number, wire transfer routing codes, recipient account details, timestamps for every fraudulent signature. Langston's face had gone gray. That's impossible. I vetted him. He took my money. He's corrupt. He took your money. I said, and photographed every document you gave him. You paid him to build your own evidence file. Norwood pulled out printed email logs. Communications between Sherman and his office. Each one documenting Langston's requests, the bribe amounts, the shortcuts he demanded. The entire red tape bypass you bragged about, I said was a prearranged path. Sherman gave you exactly what you asked for, speed, discretion, no questions. And every step was documented, time-stamped, and uploaded to secure servers before you left his office. Jacinta grabbed one of the photos. Her hands shook as she read the timestamp. You planted him 2 years ago. January 2023. I confirmed. 2 years I'd placed Sherman Hayes in that appraisal office in January 2023, more than 2 years after Cora died, when I'd already begun converting grief into architecture. But that means, Jacinta's voice caught. You were planning this before Mom even? Besins, one besewi. After she died, I corrected. The day after her funeral, I read her letter. She documented everything, every account, every shell company, every crime she'd taught you to commit. I spent the next year deciding what to do with that information. By January 2023, I had my answer. I started building. The words landed like stones in water. Langston rallied, finding his corporate voice one more time. This is textbook entrapment. You set financial traps, planted people in strategic positions, recorded everything without disclosure. No court in this country will accept evidence obtained through deliberate entrapment schemes. His voice had taken on that desperate edge of someone reciting half-remembered law school lectures. The entire case is tainted. He continued gaining momentum. Fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine applies. Any evidence derived from illegal entrapment is inadmissible. Your attorney knows this. Norwood didn't even blink. Entrapment, he said. Pulling out a legal brief with yellow highlighted sections requires a state actor, government agent, police officer, prosecutor, someone with official authority inciting a crime that wouldn't otherwise occur. He placed the brief on the table beside the photographs. Mr. Webb is a private citizen, Norwood continued. He owns legitimate companies. Vanguard Holdings is registered with the Secretary of State, pays taxes, operates within all legal frameworks. Sherman Hayes is a licensed appraiser employed by a private firm. None of this involves government actors. Langston opened his mouth to argue, but Norwood kept talking. You weren't incited. You weren't coerced. You weren't encouraged to commit crimes you wouldn't otherwise commit. You chose entirely of your own volition to steal identification, forge signatures, and wire stolen money to purchase property. You want to know the difference between a trap and justice. A trap forces you to do something wrong. Justice just watches while you choose to do it anyway. Private citizens, Norwood said, are permitted to own businesses, hire employees, and document crimes committed against them. Recording conversations in your own home is legal under Georgia one-party consent law. Owning companies that people choose to defraud is not entrapment, it's being a victim. He pulled out another document, case law, precedents highlighted and annotated. The legal precedent is clear, Norwood continued. United States versus Russell, 1973. Hampton versus United States, 1976. Entrapment defense requires government inducement of criminal activity. Private parties documenting voluntary criminal behavior is not only legal, it's encouraged as citizen cooperation with law enforcement. Langston was reading the case citations, his lips moving silently, his last defense crumbling under the weight of actual law. Jacinta sank onto the sofa. Her designer clothes rumpled her perfect hair disheveled. The confidence she'd walked in with hours ago had evaporated completely. Everything we did, she whispered. Every transaction, every conversation. You were watching all of it. I was protecting evidence, I corrected. There's a difference. The doorbell rang. The sound cut through Langston's desperate silence like a knife. 3 clear chimes, bright and cheerful, announcing visitors. I didn't need to look at my watch to know it was exactly 6 o'clock. Norwood closed his portfolio with a decisive snap. The sound echoed in the marble-floored room. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see shadows gathering. Multiple silhouettes, 20 of them, maybe more. Voices calling greetings to each other, the sounds of a family gathering. That'll be your extended family, I said to Jacinta. I invited them for a New Year's celebration. Her head snapped up. What? Your aunts, uncles, cousins. I continued walking toward the entrance hall. Melvin and Henrietta, all the relatives you haven't seen since Cora's funeral. I thought it would be nice to bring everyone together. The doorbell rang again. More voices outside. Someone laughing. Someone asking about parking. You can't, Jacinta said, standing abruptly. Dad, you can't let them see all of this. She gestured at the broken champagne glasses, the scattered legal documents, the eviction order, with its federal seal still gleaming on the coffee table. They're here for a celebration. I set my hand on the door handle. I looked back at my daughter and son-in-law, both of them surrounded by evidence of their own crimes, trapped in a mansion, purchased with stolen money they were about to lose. But they're not here to celebrate what you think they're celebrating. I opened the door. The front doors swung open, and 20 members of my extended family poured into the marble foyer, carrying bottles of champagne and wearing their best clothes, expecting to celebrate my daughter's European vacation. They had no idea they were walking into a crime scene. Jacinta, my cousin Rachel called out, holding up a bottle of Prosecco. We're so excited for your trip. When do you leave? Jacinta stood frozen in the living room doorway, broken champagne glasses still scattered across the marble behind her. She managed a smile that looked like it hurt. Tomorrow morning, she said, her voice tight. Dad wanted everyone here for a family celebration before we go. More relatives streamed in. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen since Cora's funeral. Cousins with their children. Everyone carrying wine or covered dishes or bouquets of flowers for the hostess. They started noticing things. The legal documents spread across the coffee table, the federal seal visible on the eviction order, Norwood Spencer standing in the corner in his courtroom suit, looking nothing like a party guest. Langston's face pale as death. Conversations faltered, the cheerful energy dimmed. My sister Henrietta entered near the back of the group, 62 years old, with her reading glasses catching the chandelier light. She'd taught elementary school for 30 years, and those sharp eyes could spot a lie from across a classroom. They were scanning the room now, grading the tension like she could give it a letter score. Beside her came Melvin Garrison, her husband, my brother-in-law. 65, with calloused hands folded across his chest, his weathered face showing 40 years of factory work at Delta Airlines. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd never stolen anything in his life and had zero tolerance for those who did. He caught my eye, gave me a questioning look. "What's really happening here, Clyde?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying that factory floor directness. "This doesn't look like a party." "It's a family gathering," I said, gesturing for everyone to move into the living room. "I thought we should all be together for what comes next. You might think it's cruel to expose family crimes in front of witnesses, but I'd spent 5 years watching crimes committed in front of witnesses who chose to look away." The relatives filed into the living room, finding seats on sofas and chairs, some standing by the windows. Their eyes moved from the broken crystal to the scattered documents to Jacinta's forced smile to Langston's trembling hands. Norwood stepped forward with his laptop. "If I could have everyone's attention," he said in that courtroom voice that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. The room quieted. Norwood connected his laptop to the 85-inch television mounted on the wall. The screen illuminated, casting blue light across the assembled family. A diagram appeared, lines and arrows and boxes all connected in a complex web. At the top, highlighted in Red Oak Creek Trust Retirement Account. "This audit was compiled by Tate Morgan," Norwood said. "Cybersecurity specialist. 3 months of transaction tracking. Every wire transfer documented." Tate Morgan, 35 years old, appeared in a small video window at the corner of the screen, connected remotely. His face showed the focused precision of someone who never missed a single digital footprint. "The diagram traces cash flow," Norwood continued, starting from the source account at the top. His laser pointer highlighted the red text. "Oak Creek Trust belongs to Melvin Garrison," he said. Every eye in the room turned to Melvin. He stepped forward, staring at the screen. The diagram showed arrows flowing from the top account, red lines branching into 7 different boxes, each labeled with corporate names that sounded legitimate Apex Holdings, Meridian Solutions, Vanguard Capital Partners. "Shell companies," Norwood explained, "created to obscure the money trail. Each one registered to different addresses, different agents, different filing dates, but all controlled by the same person." The red arrows converged. All 7 shell companies flowed into a single account at the bottom, Langston Valentine Business Operations. Then another set of arrows branched out from there, each one labeled with specific purchases, dates, dollar amounts. The diagram showed every luxury handbag, every resort, booking every designer dress, each red arrow, a dollar taken from a man who'd worked factory lines for 40 years. From Langston's account, Norwood said funds were distributed to various luxury vendors, European travel bookings, designer clothing retailers, high-end jewelry purchases. Each transaction is documented with date, amount, and recipient. A relative whispered, "Are those real account numbers? Is that actual money movement?" "Every red line is a documented wire transfer," I said. "Every dollar amount verified through bank records. The audit took 3 months to compile because we traced every single transaction." The screen updated. Numbers appeared beside each arrow, specific amounts. 20,000 for a Cartier bracelet, 15,000 for a Milan hotel suite, 8,000 for a Gucci handbag, all flowing from Melvin Garrison's retirement account. The room had gone completely silent. Not the polite quiet of people waiting to speak, the stunned silence of people witnessing something they couldn't quite process. Melvin stood at the front of the crowd, now staring at his account number displayed in bright red letters. His retirement. His 40 years at Delta. His pension that was supposed to fund the rest of his life. Being systematically stolen and laundered. "How much?" Melvin asked, his voice rough. Norwood clicked to the next slide. A summary page. Total amounts. $500,000, he said. Withdrawn over 18 months through daily transfers designed to avoid banking alerts. $2,000 per day, 5 days per week for 76 weeks. Henrietta's hand went to her mouth. Jacinta backed toward the wall as far from the screen as she could get. Langston just stared at his own account numbers, glowing there for everyone to see. Every relative, every witness, all 20 of them watching the proof of his crimes displayed in high definition. The living room fell into absolute silence, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than sound. 20 relatives stared at the 85-inch screen, displaying the branching red arrows of theft, the specific dollar amounts, the damning transaction codes. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sounds were the soft hum of the air conditioning running through the vents and Langston's ragged breathing as he stared at his own account numbers glowing on the screen. Then Henrietta took a step closer to the television, squinting at something she recognized. Henrietta moved closer to the 85-inch screen, her reading glasses reflecting the blue glow of the audit diagram. She squinted at the routing number sequence displayed at the top of the red arrows, 9 digits that had been burned into her memory from decades of joint banking. Her face went pale. "That's Melvin's Oak Creek Trust account," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned. Some looked at her, some looked at the screen, some looked at Langston, who had backed himself against the wall near the television. Henrietta pointed at the routing number with a shaking finger. "Those 9 digits. That's my husband's retirement account. I know that number by heart. We've been looking at it on statements for 35 years. She turned from the screen to Langston. "Why is Melvin's retirement account on this diagram?" Her voice was steady, at first controlled the same tone she'd used when catching students cheating on tests. "Why is my husband's Oak Creek Trust money connected to your business account?" Langston opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. "Answer me," Henrietta said, her voice rising. "That's 35 years of Delta Airlines payroll deductions. 10% of every paycheck Melvin ever earned. Why is it on this screen?" The room erupted. Another relative, my cousin Thomas, stepped forward, squinting at a different section of the diagram. "Wait, is that those account numbers under the second shell company?" His wife grabbed his arm. "That's our savings account. Thomas, that's our account number." A third voice from the back. "The Regions Bank routing code, that's mine. That's my business account." The crowd surged toward the screen, 20 relatives suddenly searching the red arrows and account numbers for familiar digits. Voices overlapping in confusion and growing horror. "How did he get access?" "That's impossible. I never authorized." "When did these transactions happen, Sibs?" I noticed the exact routing number for Oak Creek Trust. On the screen, 9 digits I'd seen 100 times at family gatherings. When Melvin proudly showed his quarterly statements, now proof of systematic theft documented in high definition. Langston had nowhere to go. The wall pressed against his back. The 85-inch screen glowed beside him, displaying his crimes to an audience of victims. His hands came up defensively, but he still couldn't form words. Henrietta advanced on him. "We trusted you. Melvin helped you get your first job. We came to your wedding. We brought you into this family, and you stole his retirement." Her voice cracked on the word retirement. "That money was supposed to fund the rest of our lives," she continued. "We were going to travel, buy a small place in Florida, not worry about bills. That's what 35 years of 10% deductions was for. And you..." She stopped. Couldn't finish. The crowd had gone quiet again, but this time the silence was different. Not stunned, angry. Melvin was pushing through the crowd now. Relatives parted to let him through. 35 years at Delta Airlines. Every paycheck with 10% deducted for Oak Creek Trust. Every promotion celebrated with the knowledge that retirement was building. Every late shift justified by the promise of a secure future. All stolen by a nephew he'd helped raise. Melvin reached the front of the crowd and stopped 3 feet from Langston. He didn't speak, didn't raise his hands, didn't make threats. He just stood there. The room fell silent, every relative watching, every eye moving between Melvin's face and Langston's terror. Langston pressed harder against the wall. "Uncle Melvin, I can explain. It was temporary operational capital I was going to replace." Don't," Melvin said. One word, quiet, final. Langston's mouth snapped shut. Melvin stared at him, factory calloused hands hanging at his sides, face showing nothing but controlled rage, the kind that's more terrifying than shouting, because it means every ounce of anger is being channeled into pure judgment. 40 years. Melvin said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying to every corner of the room. "I worked 40 years so I wouldn't be a burden to my children, so Henrietta and I could have peace, and you stole it." Langston tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The wall was solid behind him. "Uncle Melvin, please, I never meant..." "You meant exactly what you did," Melvin said. You saw an account with money in it. You found a way to access it, and you took it. Henrietta stood beside her husband, now trembling but steady. The other relatives who'd recognized their accounts on the screen moved closer, a semicircle forming around Langston. Not threatening, just witnessing, documenting. "How much?" Melvin asked. Langston's face had gone gray. "I don't the exact amount. How much of my retirement did you steal?" Norwood's voice came from behind the crowd. $500,000, withdrawn over 18 months through shell companies designed to avoid detection. Henrietta made a sound like she'd been hit. Melvin didn't react, didn't flinch, just kept staring at Langston with that terrible quiet fury. "You took $500,000, Melvin said, "from your uncle, from the man who helped you get your first apartment, who co-signed your first car loan, who gave the speech at your wedding." Langston was shaking now, full-body tremors. "I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to replace every dollar. The company hit some problems and I just needed time." "Time," Melvin repeated. "I gave you time, gave you 38 years of being your uncle, of trusting you, of loving you." The weight of those words settled over the room like snow. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. We all just stood there watching a man confront the nephew who'd stolen his future, and there was nothing left to say because every possible word felt too small for the betrayal. Melvin didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't even raise his voice. He just stood 3 feet from Langston, looking at him with an expression that said everything about broken trust and destroyed relationships and the particular pain of family betrayal. Langston couldn't meet his eyes, looked at the floor, at the wall, at anything except the man whose retirement he'd stolen. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration cut through the thick silence. Once, twice, 3 times. I pulled it out. Unknown number, London area code. Video call request. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the accept button, and wondered who could possibly be calling me from London at this exact moment when my family was tearing itself apart in my living room. The phone vibrated again in my hand. London area code, video call request. Unknown number. Melvin still stood 3 feet from Langston, that terrible silent fury filling the room. 20 relatives watching. Henrietta trembling beside her husband. The weight of $500,000 stolen dollars hanging in the air. And my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. "Clyde, your phone," my cousin Rachel whispered from somewhere in the crowd. I looked at the screen. The call had been ringing for 30 seconds now. Whoever was calling wasn't giving up. "I need to take this," I said. "It might be about the audit." I tapped accept. The 85-inch television screen flickered. The audit diagram with its red arrows and stolen account numbers vanished, replaced by a connecting symbol. Then the image shifted. A modern office materialized on the screen, floor-to-ceiling windows showing London's skyline at night, the city lights creating a backdrop of urban sophistication. Contemporary furniture, glass desk, the kind of corner office that spoke of serious success. "And what happened to the audit?" someone asked. "Is the London?" another relative said. "Why is London on the TV?" The call connected to the television somehow. I said, though, I knew exactly how. Norwood had set up the system 3 hours ago, routing my phone through the display screen so any call I accepted would be visible to everyone in the room. A figure moved into frame. Late 20s, sharp features, charcoal suit tailored to perfection. He stood in that London office with the calm authority of someone who belonged there, who had earned his place through years of work rather than inheritance. I recognized him immediately, my youngest son. 7 years older than the last time most of this family had seen him. Blaze looked directly at the camera. His eyes found Jacinta standing frozen in the corner of the living room. "Hi, Jacinta," he said, his voice carrying across 5,000 miles with perfect clarity. "Long time no see." Jacinta's face went white. "Who?" she started, then stopped. Her hand went to her throat. "Wait, I know that voice." "It's been 7 years since you last saw your little brother," Blaze said. The room erupted in whispers, heads turning between the screen and Jacinta. Relatives who remembered Blaze from before he disappeared. Others who'd never met him at all. "Blaze," my sister Henrietta said. "Is that Clyde? Is that your son?" Yes, I said simply. I watched my daughter's face drain of color as she stared at the screen, the same expression she wore 10 years ago when I confronted her about the forged scholarship documents. Jacinta found her voice. "You have no right to be involved in this family's business. You left. You disappeared. You don't get to show up now, and I have every right," Blaze interrupted his tone, still calm, but carrying steel underneath. 10 years ago, you forged my name and stole my $40,000 scholarship. The relatives went quiet again. I was accepted to Georgia Tech, Blaze continued. Full scholarship, 4 years paid, engineering program, everything I'd worked for since freshman year of high school. He paused, letting the words settle. You needed money for something I don't even remember what anymore. You found the scholarship letter in Dad's office. You forged my signature on the declination form. Then you forged acceptance letters in your own name and claimed the scholarship funds as administrative reimbursement. Jacinta backed against the wall. I didn't. Georgia Tech called me 3 weeks before classes started. Blaze said, confused about why I'd declined. By then the money was gone. The spot was filled, and you'd already spent the scholarship on whatever it was you needed more than your brother's education. The audit diagram had exposed Langston's theft in numbers and routing codes. Now Blaze's calm voice was exposing Jacinta's theft, in a currency far more personal, a brother's stolen future. I had to drop out before I'd even started, Blaze continued. Took entry-level work, paid off student loans for classes I never attended because the scholarship office demanded reimbursement. Started over with nothing. He gestured at the office around him, the London skyline, the corner office success. Built all of this from that nothing. Blaze, I said, my voice carrying across the room. Tell them about Vanguard. He nodded. 5 years ago, Dad called me in London, asked if I wanted to manage Vanguard Holdings, not as charity, as restoration. He looked directly at Jacinta through the camera. He told me what Mom had started, what you'd continued, the fraud, the theft, the years of stealing from family while pretending to be successful. He said he was building a system to document everything, to protect everyone, to finally stop you. Blaze's expression didn't change. No anger, no satisfaction. Just cold statement of fact. He asked if I wanted to help, if I wanted to be part of making sure you couldn't hurt anyone else, so I said yes. The room was absolutely silent now. Even Melvin had turned from Langston to watch the screen. I've spent 5 years managing Vanguard Holdings, Blaze said. Building legitimate businesses, real companies, actual value, everything you pretended to be but never were. He paused. Let the silence build. And I waited. Another pause. Longer this time. I waited 10 years, Jacinta. 10 years for you to finally understand what you took from me. What you took from Melvin. What you took from every person in that room who trusted you. His voice dropped lower, quieter, more devastating for the restraint. I waited for this exact moment, for you to stand in front of our entire family and hear the truth about who you are. Jacinta stood frozen, unable to speak. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Now everyone in this room knows exactly who you are, Blaze said. Not the successful influencer, not the European traveler, not the beloved daughter. He leaned slightly toward the camera. They know you're a thief, just like Mom was, just like Langston is. And unlike the rest of us, you can't pretend anymore. The declaration hung in the air like smoke, Blaze's words echoing in the silence. The London office behind him gleaming with floor-to-ceiling windows, proof that he'd rebuilt everything she tried to destroy. Every relative watched Jacinta, waited for a response, an explanation, an apology, anything. She just stood there speechless, unable to defend herself against the truth delivered by the brother she'd tried to destroy 10 years ago. The brother who'd waited patiently for justice to finally arrive. Melvin turned away from the screen showing Blaze in London and walked straight toward Langston, his question cutting through the silence like a blade. Where is my retirement money? The room's attention shifted, away from Blaze's revelation about the stolen scholarship, away from Jacinta's speechless humiliation, back to the physical confrontation happening right here in the living room. Langston pressed harder against the wall. Uncle Melvin, I can explain. 35 years at Delta. Melvin said, his voice steady and cold. Every paycheck, 10% deducted automatically. Where is it? Langston's hands came up defensively. It's complicated. The market conditions there were unexpected variables. The money, Melvin repeated. Where is it? Tate Morgan's voice came through the television speakers. The screen split Blaze in London on one side, and on the other, a new layer of the audit diagram materializing. The screen shows daily withdrawals for 6 months straight. Tate said, his voice carrying that precision of someone who'd traced every digital footprint. $2,000 every single day, 183 consecutive transactions. The diagram updated, red lines appearing one by one, each representing a withdrawal, each dated and time-stamped. January 15th, $2,000, January 16th, $2,000, January 17th, $2,000. On and on. 6 months of systematic theft displayed in chronological order. Those aren't, Langston stammered. Your authorization code is on every single transaction, Tate said. The same credentials you used for legitimate business. Same IP address. Same device signatures. This wasn't a hack. This was you. Langston's face had gone gray. He looked at Melvin, at the screen, at the relatives forming a semicircle around him. I thought I could fix it, he said, his voice breaking. The company, it went insolvent 8 months ago. I thought I could cover the losses and restore everything before anyone noticed. The confession hung in the air. If fix it with my retirement, Melvin asked quietly. I was going to put it all back, Langston said desperately. I swear I was going to replace every dollar. The market was supposed to turn around. The investments were supposed to recover. I just needed time. Time, Melvin repeated. I watched my nephew crumble and felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, just the cold arithmetic of trust destroyed, and 35 years of labor stolen in daily increments designed to avoid detection. You stole from me for 6 months, Melvin said. While I was having dinner with you, while I was asking about your business, while I was proud of your success, you were stealing $2,000 a day from my retirement. Langston slid down the wall slightly, his knees weakening. I was desperate. The company was hemorrhaging money. Clients were pulling out. I had debts I couldn't cover. I thought, if I could just stabilize things. You thought you could gamble with my future, Melvin said. He moved deliberately, reached up, removed his suit vest, the one he'd worn to this family, gathering the one he'd probably owned for a decade, because Melvin wasn't the kind of man who bought new clothes when the old ones still worked. He folded it carefully, precisely, laid it over the arm of the nearest chair. Melvin's removed vest hung there like a discarded civilized skin. What stood before Langston now was something older and more dangerous, a man whose entire future was stolen by someone he'd helped raise. You're going to stand right there, Melvin said, his voice dropping to thunder-deep command, until the police arrive. Uncle Melvin, please. Langston tried to step sideways away from the wall. Melvin moved to block him, didn't touch him, didn't raise his hands, just stood in Langston's path, his presence alone creating an impassable barrier. They're 35 years, Melvin said. You didn't steal money, Langston. You stole 35 years of my life. The relatives watched in absolute silence. No one intervened. No one suggested mercy or understanding. They all just stood there witnessing a man confront the nephew who'd destroyed his retirement. I have children, Melvin continued. Grandchildren. I was supposed to help them. College funds, down payments on houses. Instead, I get to tell them their inheritance is gone because their cousin stole it to cover his failed business. Langston was openly crying now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll pay it back. I'll work for the rest of my life if I have to. You don't have it to pay back, Melvin said. That's what insolvent means. The money's gone. You gambled it away trying to save a company that was already dead. He stepped closer. Langston pressed back against the wall. So, yes, Melvin said. You're going to stand right there, and you're going to face what you did, and you're not going to run. Langston's eyes darted around the room, looking for exits, looking for allies, looking for any escape from the judgment closing in around him. His gaze landed on the hallway leading to the front door. I saw the calculation in his expression, the desperate math of someone weighing their chances of making it past Melvin through the crowd, out the door before anyone could stop him. He tensed, prepared to run. Then he saw Norwood Spencer. My attorney stood in the doorway to the entrance hall, arms crossed blocking the only exit, his courtroom authority and ice-cold composure filling the space. Norwood shook his head slowly, once, left to right. Number. Nobody's going anywhere, Norwood said quietly. Langston's eyes moved frantically, Melvin blocking one path, Norwood blocking the other. 20 relatives forming an unbreakable semicircle of witnesses. The 85-inch screen behind him still displaying the evidence of his crimes. Tate's forensic audit on one side, Blaze watching from London on the other. I should go, Langston whispered. You should stand there, Melvin said. And wait. Langston looked at his uncle, at the attorney in the doorway, at the family surrounding him. at the inescapable reality of what he'd done and what was coming. He was trapped, completely utterly trapped, with nowhere to run and no one left to lie to, and an entire family watching him face the consequences of stealing a man's lifetime of work. Melvin stood 3 feet away, didn't move, didn't speak, just waited with the patience of someone who'd worked 40 years in factories and knew how to stand his ground when something mattered. And Langston realized finally devastatingly that this was real. The police were coming. The evidence was irrefutable. And he was going to pay for what he'd done. Tate Morgan stepped forward, tablet in hand, his expression grim. Before we move on to the property fraud, he said, "There's something else you all need to see. Jacinta's influencer career." Jacinta's face went pale. "That has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with this," Tate interrupted. He tapped the tablet and the projection screen lit up with a dizzying array of social media analytics, follower counts, engagement rates, sponsorship deals, 14 years of carefully curated content. Tate swiped to the next screen. Here's where it gets interesting. Every single sponsorship deal Jacinta ever secured, from fashion brands to wellness companies to luxury travel, was routed through a network of shell companies. He highlighted 3 entities: Meridian Marketing Solutions, Apex Brand Partnerships, and Velocity Digital Media. The math is simple, Tate continued. Jacinta would secure a sponsorship deal worth, say, $50,000. The brand would pay Meridian Marketing. Meridian would take a 30% commission, then pay Jacinta the remaining $35,000. But here's the kicker: Meridian was funded entirely by money stolen from this family. The brands were real, the deals were real, but the entire infrastructure was a fraud designed to make dirty money look clean. I felt the room tilt. 14 years. Every perfectly filtered photo, every glowing product review, every aspirational post about living your best life, all of it built on stolen money. Over 14 years, Tate said, pulling up a spreadsheet. Jacinta's influencer career generated approximately $3.2 million in apparent income. Of that, $1.8 million came from the shell companies. The remaining $1.4 million came from legitimate brand deals that Jacinta secured because her follower base, purchased with laundered money, made her attractive to real sponsors. She used fraud to create the appearance of success, then leveraged that appearance to generate actual success. It's money laundering meets influencer marketing. Jacinta stood frozen, her carefully curated image crumbling in real time. The room was silent for a beat. Then Jacinta found her voice. "You want to talk about fraud, Clyde?" Her tone was ice. "Let's talk about your heart attack." Everyone turned to look at her. That convenient little cardiac event that brought us all here tonight? Jacinta's laugh was bitter. "You didn't have a real heart attack. You faked it. This entire confrontation, the projector, the evidence, the dramatic revelations, it was all planned. You needed a reason to gather the family, so you staged a medical emergency. Dr. Hampton was probably in on it from the start." My mother stood. "Jacinta, that's absurd. I was there when—" "Were you there when the doctor examined him?" Jacinta challenged. "Or did you just take Clyde's word for it?" I pulled out my phone and dialed. The room went quiet as the call connected, and I put it on speaker. "Clyde." Dr. Bryce Hampton's voice filled the room, professional and concerned. "Is everything all right? You're supposed to be resting." Dr. Hampton had been my cardiologist for 3 years, ever since a routine physical flagged some irregularities. He was 52, methodical and pathologically honest, the kind of doctor who'd rather tell you hard truths than comfortable lies. "I'm fine, Dr. Hampton," I said, "but I have a question for you, and I need you to answer it in front of my family. The cardiac event I experienced this morning, was it real?" There was a pause. Then, "Clyde, you had a genuine myocardial infarction. Your troponin levels were elevated, your EKG showed ST segment changes, and your angiogram revealed a partial blockage in your left anterior descending artery. Could I have faked it?" "Faked a heart attack?" Dr. Hampton sounded incredulous. "No, absolutely not. The diagnostic tests don't lie. You had a real cardiac event, Clyde, a serious one. And if you're not resting right now, you're putting yourself at risk for another one." I looked at Jacinta. "Anything else you'd like to accuse me of?" Her face had gone white. She opened her mouth, closed it, then sank back into her chair. "Thank you, Dr. Hampton," I said. "I'll rest soon, I promise." I ended the call. The room was silent. Then Langston spoke for the first time all evening, his voice quiet and dangerous. Jacinta, shut up. You're making this worse. But Jacinta wasn't done. She stood trembling with rage and pointed at the screen still displaying her analytics. You think you've won? You think exposing my career destroys me? I built something real. I created value. What have you done, Clyde? You've spent 20 years nursing grudges and planning revenge. At least I was living my life. Living your life with stolen money, I said quietly. Her hand moved to her purse. For a split second, I thought she was reaching for her phone. Then I saw the glint of metal, and everything changed. Jacinta's hand emerged from her purse holding her phone. She stared at it for a moment, then hurled it against the wall. The screen shattered with a sharp crack that made everyone flinch. Then she turned and walked away from Langston, crossing the room to stand beside me. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Langston stood alone now, isolated in the center of the living room. His back hit the wall, and he froze there, chest heaving. Melvin blocked the path to the hallway on his left. Norwood stood planted in front of the main door. 20 relatives formed a loose semicircle, not threatening, just present a human barrier between him and any escape route. I need to... This isn't... Langston's voice came out, breathless, strangled. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for an ally and opening anything. You're not going anywhere, Melvin said quietly. A whisper rippled through the relatives. He's falling apart. I watched Langston's polished CFO demeanor dissolve in real time. The confident finance executive who'd walked into this estate 3 hours ago was gone. In his place stood someone cornered, desperate, sweating through his expensive shirt. Then something shifted in his expression. The panic flickered and died, replaced by something harder, meaner. You know what? Langston's voice cracked like a whip. You want the truth? Fine. Here's the truth. He pushed away from the wall, standing straighter, his face twisted with contempt. I never respected any of you, he said. Not one person in this room. You're all self-satisfied fools living on illusions you built with inherited money, not earned skill. You sit here in your estate and your expensive clothes, and you pretend you're better than everyone else, but you're not. You're lucky, that's all. Lucky to be born into money someone else made. The room went silent. Even the whispers stopped. You act like you're pillars of the community. Langston continued, his voice rising. But you're parasites. Living off investments you didn't research, properties you didn't develop, businesses you didn't build. I'm the only one in this family who actually understands how wealth works. The only one who knows how to make money, move, how to leverage capital, how to think strategically about discernbors and makes, how to steal from your own family. Blaze's voice cut through the tirade. Langston whirled on him. I didn't steal, I redistributed. I took money that was sitting idle and put it to work. That's not theft, that's financial management. You stole my college fund, Blaze said flatly. You would have wasted it, Langston shot back. Just like your father wasted every opportunity he ever had. Every head in the room turned to me, waiting, watching. I said nothing. I'd learned decades ago that silence is the sharpest response to a man losing control. Langston's finger trembled as he pointed at me. He spat. You built this trap because you're dying, and you can't admit you failed. You failed as a father, Clyde. Couldn't keep your daughter from stealing. Couldn't keep your son from leaving. Couldn't hold your family together. So instead you built this revenge machine. You think exposing me makes you righteous? It makes you pathetic. The room held its breath. This is what happens when someone spends 38 years hiding contempt behind a smile, and the mask finally cracks under pressure. All that buried rage, all those unspoken resentments, they corrode from the inside until there's nothing left but acid. Are you finished? I asked quietly. Langston's chest heaved. His face was flushed, veins standing out on his forehead. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. I want everyone to hear something. I received this voicemail 2 weeks ago, December the 17th, 11:47 p.m. Don't, Langston's voice cracked with panic. You can't. I tapped play. The TV speakers crackled to life. Langston's voice filled the living room, but it sounded different, desperate, raw, nothing like the confident CFO tone we'd all heard for years. Uncle Clyde, it's me. I need to talk to you about something urgent, something I can't tell anyone else. The company's in trouble, real trouble. I made some investments that didn't pan out. Cryptocurrency. I thought I could multiply the capital quickly, get ahead of the market, but so no stes, big bore. The recorded Langston paused. In the living room, the real Langston stood frozen face white. The company's bankrupt, the voicemail continued. I gambled investor money, all of it. I need $500,000 to cover the losses before the auditors find out. I know it's a lot, but I'm family. We take care of family. You've always said that. Another pause. Then, don't tell Jacinta, please. She knows nothing except how to spend money. The voicemail timestamp glowed on the TV screen, December 17th, 11:47 p.m. 3 days before my heart attack, proving Langston knew his company was bankrupt before the automated system ever activated. The audio file ended with a soft click. Silence filled the living room like a physical weight. Not the silence of anticipation, but the silence of devastation. The kind of quiet that follows a bomb blast when the ringing in your ears is all that's left. I looked at Jacinta. Her face had gone blank, all expression wiped clean. Then slowly tears began to run down her cheeks. Not angry tears, not defensive tears. Not the calculated tears of someone playing for sympathy. These were the quiet tears of someone who just heard her husband call her a burden in his moment of desperation. Someone who just learned that the man she'd built a life with, however fraudulent that life was, held her in contempt. "Burden wife," she whispered. The words barely carried across the room. Langston opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. He reached toward her. "Jacinta," she flinched away from his hand like it was a snake. The room watched them. Husband and wife, partners in fraud, united in theft. But in this moment, the alliance shattered. Jacinta wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. She looked at Langston for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and I saw the exact moment she made her choice. Jacinta took one step toward me, then another. She crossed the room slowly, deliberately, until she stood at my side. She didn't look back at Langston. She didn't say a word. The silence stretched for 3 seconds, 5, 10. Then Langston broke. He bolted toward the front door, his dress shoes hammering against the hardwood floor. The polished CFO composure he'd worn for 48 years, shattered completely. What remained was pure animal fear driving him toward escape. "He's running!" someone gasped. "Stop him!" another relative shouted. Jacinta's head whipped around. "Langston!" Her voice carried shock, confusion, and something that might have been hope, the irrational hope that her husband wouldn't actually abandon her in front of 20 witnesses. She was wrong. Langston reached the entrance hall in 4 strides. Jacinta moved after him, instinct overriding reason. She reached out and grabbed his shirt sleeve. "Langston, wait, we can, spends on He jerked his arm away without looking back. "Get off me!" The force of his movement sent Jacinta stumbling sideways. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself, breathing hard. A relative gasped. He pushed her. I watched my son-in-law push my daughter aside and felt the final ember of family connection die. The man who'd married Jacinta 15 years ago, who'd stood in this same estate and promised to honor her, cherish her, protect her, just revealed himself to be exactly what the voicemail proved: someone who viewed his wife as a burden to discard when convenient. Langston reached the front door and grabbed the handle. Norwood Spencer didn't move. He stood in the doorway 6 feet tall and immovable arms crossed over his chest. "Move!" Langston's voice cracked. "Get out of my way!" "No," Norwood said calmly. "You can't keep me here." Langston tried to push past him. Norwood didn't budge. The family watched a once polished CFO reduced to a desperate man clawing at a blocked exit. Jacinta stood where Langston had pushed her, one hand still gripping the chair back. She stared at her husband's back, watching, processing, understanding. Langston pounded his fist against Norwood's shoulder. "I said move." "No," Norwood repeated. His voice never changed. Stone doesn't argue with wind. I let the scene play out for another 10 seconds. Langston pushing, shoving, desperate. Norwood standing firm. The family watching a man disintegrate. Then I reached into my inside jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. The paper was yellowed with age, creased from 5 years of carrying. I'd kept it close since the day Cora died, waiting, planning, knowing this moment would come. I turned to Jacinta. "Your mother wrote this 5 years ago. I've been waiting for the right time." The room went quiet. Even Langston stopped pushing against Norwood and turned to look. Jacinta's eyes fixed on the envelope. "What is that?" "Read it," I said. "You're old enough now to understand." I crossed to where she stood and placed the envelope in her hand. Her fingers trembled as she took it. The yellowed envelope was a time bomb with a 5-year fuse. Cora had struck the match before she died, and I'd been carrying the inevitable explosion in my jacket pocket ever since. Tonight, the timer reached 0. Jacinta opened the envelope slowly, carefully, as if it might crumble to dust. She pulled out 2 sheets of paper covered in Cora's familiar handwriting, the elegant script she'd learned at finishing school decades ago, before life taught her that elegance couldn't protect you from your own choices. Cora Webb had been my wife for 32 years before she died, 58 years old when she swallowed the pills that stopped her heart. She'd left this letter in her nightstand drawer with my name written on the outside and inside instructions to give it to Jacinta when the time was right. I'd read it the day after the funeral. Then I'd folded it, put it in my jacket pocket, and started planning. Jacinta's hands shook as she unfolded the pages. She read silently for a moment, her eyes scanning the first paragraph. Then her face went white. "Out loud," I said quietly. "Everyone needs to hear this." Jacinta's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Jacinta, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Your father will know when the time is right to show you these words. I need you to understand something I should have told you years ago, but I was too proud, too ashamed." She paused, swallowed, continued. "I started this. The fraud was my idea, not yours. You think you initiated the shell companies, the false accounts, the money transfers, but you only followed the path I laid for you. I created the first shell company when you were 12 years old. I taught you how to manipulate financial records when you were 16. I showed you how to hide transfers when you were 19. You didn't invent this system. You inherited it from me." The room was silent except for Jacinta's trembling voice. "I thought I was teaching you survival, how to secure your future, how to protect yourself in a world that takes everything from women who don't plan ahead. But I was wrong. I was teaching you how to destroy your soul one transaction at a time. Money matters less than dignity. I learned too late. I hope you learn before the cost becomes unbearable." Jacinta's voice broke. She stopped reading, staring at the page. "Finish it," I said. "I'm sorry for what I made you. I'm sorry for the path I created. I'm sorry I won't be there to help you find your way back. Tell your father I loved him, even though I know he stopped loving me years ago. Tell him he was right about everything. Tell him—" Jacinta stopped. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. She folded the letter carefully, precisely as if maintaining control over the creases could somehow restore order to her collapsing world. Then she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. How long have you known Dad?" Before I could answer, Norwood Spencer stepped forward and placed 2 documents on the coffee table between us. The sound of paper hitting wood cut through Jacinta's question like a gavel. 5 years, I said quietly. "Since the day your mother died and left that letter." Jacinta's face went pale. "You planned all of this for 5 years. I built a system," I said. Then I waited for the right moment to activate it. Your mother gave me the blueprint in her letter. She documented every account she'd created, every shell company she'd established, every transaction she'd taught you to replicate. She wanted me to know the truth, so I used it. The room was silent except for Langston's ragged breathing at the door. The heart attack triggered the automated evidence distribution. I continued. But everything else, the documentation, the legal filings, the cooperation agreements, I built those over 5 years, methodically, carefully, waiting for the moment when you'd all be together in one room with nowhere to run. Jacinta stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Norwood tapped the first document. 2 documents. Read them both carefully. Jacinta picked up the first page with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the header. Department of Justice press release. She read silently for a moment. Her face went from pale to gray. Jacinta Webb indicted on 14 counts of credit card fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud spanning 14 years. Investigation reveals a pattern of fraudulent credit applications, using stolen family financial information, resulting in estimated losses exceeding $400,000. Webb faces maximum sentence of 20 years federal prison. Her voice cracked on the last words. "And this one." She picked up the second document. "That one renounces your inheritance," I said. Jacinta read the title. "Voluntary renunciation of all future inheritance rights. I'm giving you a choice your mother never got," I said quietly. "She died knowing what she'd done to you, knowing she'd created a path that led straight to prison. She left you that letter because she hoped you'd find a way out. This is it. The only one." Jacinta stared at her hands, the same hands that had signed luxury credit applications for 14 years, that had posted sponsored Instagram content, funded by stolen money that had reached for Langston as he pushed her away. And I watched her realize those hands had never actually built anything real. $28 million, she whispered. "You're asking me to walk away from $28 million. "I'm asking you to choose freedom over money," I said. "The same choice your mother wished she'd made." Jacinta opened her mouth to respond. Then blue and red lights flashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the entire family in alternating colors of guilt and exposure. Nobody in this room was walking away unchanged. Car doors slammed outside. Heavy footsteps on the front porch. The doorbell rang. Norwood stepped away from blocking Langston and opened the door. FBI Special Agent Ross Blackwell entered first mid-40s with silver threading through his close-cropped hair. He carried himself with the calm authority of someone who'd executed hundreds of white-collar arrest warrants and knew this case was already airtight. 2 more agents flanked him. Langston Valentine. Agent Blackwell's voice was professional, almost bored. Langston backed against the wall. Yes, but you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations." Agent Blackwell pulled out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." You can't." Langston's voice climbed toward panic. "What evidence? You can't just—" "We have everything we need," Agent Blackwell said calmly. "Financial records, witness testimony, digital forensics. Your voicemail confession to Clyde Webb was particularly helpful." Langston's head whipped toward Melvin. You cooperated?" "This morning," Melvin repeated, "when Norwood showed me what Clyde had built. I gave the FBI everything. It wasn't hard you'd stolen my retirement fund. I had copies of every transaction." Agent Blackwell approached Langston with the handcuffs. The family parted, creating a clear path. "Turn around," Agent Blackwell said. Langston turned slowly, mechanically. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with metallic finality. "This was all a trap!" Langston's voice rose to a shout as the agents took his arms. "You orchestrated everything. You set this up, planned. It manipulated us into—" "Nobody forced you to steal," I said quietly. "Nobody forced you to sign your name to fraudulent documents. Nobody forced you to gamble investor money on cryptocurrency. Nobody forced you to call your wife a burden. You made those choices yourself." "I'll fight this," Langston spat as the agents led him toward the door. "You'll see. I'll prove you set me up. You'll lose," Agent Blackwell said flatly. "The evidence is overwhelming. Your own lawyer will tell you to plead out." They walked Langston past the living room, past the projection screen still displaying Jacinta's analytics, past the coffee table with the 2 documents, past Jacinta standing frozen with Cora's letter still clutched in one hand. Langston didn't look at her. Not once. As he was led past, he kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, as if his wife had already ceased to exist. The door closed behind them with a soft click. The sound of footsteps faded down the porch steps. Car doors opened and shut. Engines started. Jacinta stood alone in the center of the living room, watching the red and blue lights fade through the windows as the FBI vehicles pulled away. She looked down at the inheritance renunciation document still sitting on the coffee table. Then she looked at me. "He didn't even look back," she whispered. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed through the entire house. Langston was gone. The FBI was gone. The red and blue lights had faded from the windows. Jacinta stood alone in the center of the living room, surrounded by 20 silent relatives. Nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached out a hand or offered a sympathetic word. They just watched. She stood there for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Slowly, the reality of her abandonment settled over her like a physical weight. "He didn't even look back at her," a relative whispered. 15 years of marriage," another murmured. Jacinta's lips moved barely audible. "He's really gone." Her eyes drifted across the room unfocused until they landed on something by the stairs, her designer suitcase, still standing exactly where she'd left it 3 hours ago, packed and ready for tomorrow's flight. She stared at it. The suitcase was Louis Vuitton, $3,500. Inside, 2 weeks of carefully curated outfits for Paris, Monaco, Barcelona. Her passport sat on the entry table next to it, alongside printed first-class tickets to Charles de Gaulle, all of it suddenly meaningless. "I was supposed to fly to Paris tomorrow," Jacinta said quietly. Her voice sounded hollow, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "First class." Nobody responded. "Langston and I were going to celebrate New Year at the Ritz," she continued. "We had reservations at 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, tickets to the opera, a private tour of Versailles." I looked at her. "With whose money?" The question landed like a slap. Jacinta flinched. She stopped, started again. "I thought it was ours. The sponsorships, the brand deals, the shell companies," I finished. "The laundered money, the stolen funds. That's what paid for Paris. That's what paid for the suitcase. That's what paid for the life you thought was real." Jacinta's face crumpled. She looked around the room as if searching for someone to contradict me, someone to tell her it wasn't true. Nobody did. Then she looked directly at me for the first time all night. Not defiant, not calculating, just broken. "Do you hate me, Dad?" The room went absolutely silent. 20 relatives held their collective breath. I looked at my daughter across the living room and saw Cora's face, not the Cora who died 5 years ago, with guilt and pills in her system, but the Cora from 30 years earlier, who'd promised to build something real together before money turned promise into poison. All of this, Jacinta gestured weakly at the projection screen, the documents, the empty space where Langston had stood. 5 years of planning, the system, the trap. "Do you hate me?" I let the silence stretch for a moment, considering, remembering. "I don't hate you, Jacinta," I said finally. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm just tired," I continued. "Tired of protecting my property from my own daughter. Tired of watching you take and call it earning. Tired of knowing that every time I turned my back, you were signing my name to fraudulent applications or draining accounts I'd built over 40 years. I paused. "That's not hate. That's exhaustion." Jacinta's shoulders shook. A single tear ran down her cheek, cutting through what remained of her makeup. "Your mother spent the last year of her life exhausted too," I said quietly. "Exhausted from maintaining the lie, from teaching you to do the same, from knowing she'd created a path that led straight to where you're standing right now. That's what killed her, not the pills, the weight." The inheritance renunciation document sat on the coffee table like a death certificate for a life that had never actually existed. 14 years of luxury built on fraud, ending with signature and stamp. Jacinta stared at it. Then slowly she walked to the coffee table. Her movements were mechanical, deliberate. She picked up the pen Norwood had placed beside the document. Her hand trembled. The room watched in absolute silence. She pressed the pen to paper. Her signature came out shaky, but clear, legally binding Jacinta Marie Webb. The pen scratched against the paper, then stopped. "There," she whispered. "It's done." She set the pen down on the glass table. The sound, a soft clink, was the only noise in the entire room. No applause, no commentary, no reaction from the 20 relatives watching. Jacinta had just signed away a $28 million inheritance. She'd chosen suspended sentence and probation over prison. She'd chosen survival over wealth. And the family said nothing. I said nothing, because there was nothing to say. This wasn't victory, this wasn't redemption, this was simply consequence. Norwood folded the document with precise movements, sliding it into an official envelope. He stamped it one final time, another decisive thunk that echoed in the silence. Then he looked up and met my eyes. He nodded once. "Done." Jacinta stood beside the coffee table, one hand still resting where the document had been. Her marriage was over. Her husband was arrested. Her mother was dead. Her inheritance was gone. Her trip to Paris was canceled. Her influencer career was exposed as fraud. The only sound in the room was her own breathing. She looked up at me, eyes red and hollow. "What happens now?" she asked. I turned away from her and addressed the room. "Now," I said, "we talk about what happens to the estate." The silence after Jacinta's signature stretched across the living room, like the moment after Thunder family members stood frozen, processing that the spectacle was actually over. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. 20 relatives remained exactly where they'd been standing for the past hour, absorbing what they had witnessed. Langston arrested. Jacinta's inheritance signed away. Cora's suicide letter revealed. 14 years of fraud exposed. The entire architecture of lies dismantled in a single night. "Is it really over?" someone whispered. "I can't believe what we just witnessed," another relative breathed. "Clyde knew," a third voice said quietly. He knew everything? I stood near the projection screen watching my family process the aftermath, watching them recalculate everything they thought they knew about the past 5 years, watching them understand that tonight wasn't spontaneous rage, it was deliberate protection. Norwood stood beside the coffee table, the signed document secured in its official envelope. His job was done. The legal mechanism had functioned exactly as designed. Then Melvin Garrison stepped forward from the crowd. He walked directly to me, moving slowly. 65 years old with bad knees and stolen retirement, finally about to be restored. He stopped in front of me and put his arm around my shoulder. Two men in their 70s who'd known each other 40 years. Brothers-in-law, family. Clyde, he said. Melvin, I replied. He didn't say much else, just stood there with his arm on my shoulder, the weight of gratitude needing no words. Then quietly, 35 years, you got it back. I nodded. The pension, Melvin said. Will we actually get it back, stores? Wang si of presto. Every dollar, I confirmed. From Vanguard Holdings, everyone who was stolen from gets full reimbursement. Your retirement fund, Blaze's scholarship, the property equity, all of it. Melvin's hand tightened on my shoulder. You protected us, he said, all of us. I watched Melvin's hand on my shoulder and remembered 40 years ago when he married my sister Henrietta, promising at the altar to take care of her forever. He'd kept that promise through 40 years of marriage, raising 2 children together, building a life on teacher salaries and careful savings. Tonight I'd return that promise by taking care of Melvin's stolen future. Not revenge, I said quietly. Protection. Melvin nodded slowly, understanding the distinction. A ripple moved through the relatives. They'd heard. They understood. This wasn't about punishment. It was about making the family whole. How much total bukkur, someone asked. Everything that was taken, I said, addressing the room. Every fraudulent credit card charge, every stolen transfer, every embezzled dollar. Norwood and Tate documented it all. Vanguard Holdings will disperse full reimbursement within 30 days. The room exhaled collectively. You built all of this, Melvin said, to protect us, while we didn't even know we were being robbed. I built it, I corrected, because family protects family, even when family doesn't protect itself. Melvin released my shoulder and stepped back. He nodded once deep meaningful, then turned and walked toward the door. Other relatives began following. One by one they filed past me. Each offered a nod, a word, a brief acknowledgement. Thank you, Clyde. I didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't know. You took care of us. Not because I was rich, not because I owned the estate, because I'd protected them when they didn't know they needed protection. The family filed out like congregation leaving church after a funeral, quiet change processing something that needed to happen, but nobody wanted to witness. The storm had passed. They carried the weight of what they'd seen, but they left lighter than they'd arrived. Reimbursement coming, justice delivered, truth exposed. Henrietta squeezed my hand as she passed. Cora would be proud, she whispered. I wasn't sure that was true, but I nodded anyway. One by one, the relatives departed. The living room gradually emptied. Norwood stood silently by the fireplace, waiting. The last relative, a distant cousin I barely knew, nodded on her way out. Thank you for the truth, she said. Then she was gone. The living room fell completely silent. Just me and Norwood in a space that had held 20 witnesses an hour ago. The projection screen was dark. The coffee table was clear, except for Cora's letter still sitting where Jacinta had left it. Norwood stood beside the coffee table, the signed document secured in its official envelope. He looked at me across the quiet room. It's done, he said simply. I said nothing. Outside, Atlanta carried on toward midnight, indifferent to what had just happened inside these walls. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Give me a moment, I said. Norwood nodded and stepped into the entrance hall to wait. I stood alone in the living room, with Cora's letter on the coffee table, and the weight of 5 years finally lifting from my shoulders, replaced not with triumph, but with something quieter and more complicated than I'd expected. There was still one thing left to do tonight. Norwood caught Jacinta at the front door before she could step outside. His hand on her arm was gentle but firm. Not yet, he said quietly. You need this first. He handed her an official document. Jacinta stared at it, then at him. Jacinta's face went white. This is my home. You signed away your inheritance, Norwood interrupted. This is Vanguard Holdings property now. You're legally a tenant with no lease. The eviction notice takes effect tonight. He gestured toward the staircase. You can pack basic clothing. Nothing else? Everything in this house is subject to fraud investigation and asset seizure. Jacinta looked at her designer suitcase, then back at Norwood. And that suitcase stays, he said. Vanguard property, purchased with laundered funds. She climbed the marble staircase slowly, Norwood following. Each step felt like walking toward execution. Her bedroom door stood open, the $200,000 custom suite she'd designed 3 years ago. California king bed, with Italian linens walk-in closet larger than most studio apartments, ensuite bathroom with heated marble floors. Norwood handed her 3 black plastic garbage bags. Basic clothing only, he said. Jeans, t-shirts, practical items. No designer pieces, no jewelry, no electronics. Those are all Vanguard property pending investigation. Jacinta held the garbage bags, staring at them like they were snakes. I'm packing my life into trash bags, she whispered. You're packing what's actually yours, Norwood corrected. Everything else was purchased with stolen money. She walked to her closet and pulled out a pair of jeans, then another, a t-shirt, a sweater. Each item went into the black bag with a soft rustle. She reached for a Chanel handbag. This was a gift, she said. From Langston, our anniversary. Purchased with laundered money, Norwood said flatly. Vanguard property. The bag went back on the shelf. Jacinta continued packing. Underwear, socks, a winter coat, running shoes. The mundane essentials of existence stripped of luxury branding and aspirational meaning. 14 years of accumulated luxury reduced to 3 garbage bags. The black trash bag sat on $200,000 custom carpeting, like visual proof of exactly how fast luxury collapses when the foundation is fraud. 14 years of accumulation fits in 3 garbage bags, when you're only allowed to keep what you actually earned. Jacinta tied the first bag shut, then the second, then the third. She stood in the center of her bedroom, looking around one final time. Custom furniture she'd selected from Italian catalogs. Walk-in closet with motorized clothing racks. Ensuite, bathroom with rain shower and soaking tub. Window seat overlooking the Buckhead Estate Gardens. Everything she thought defined success. 14 years in this room, she whispered. "It's time to go," Norwood said. Jacinta picked up 2 of the garbage bags. Norwood took the third. She walked to the light switch and paused, hand hovering. Then she flipped it off. The room went dark. She pulled the door closed behind her. The latch clicked with finality. She wouldn't open that door again. I watched from my office doorway as Jacinta descended the staircase with 3 black bags, Norwood following. She didn't look at me, didn't speak, just walked to the front door, pushed it open with her shoulder, and stepped into the December night. The door closed. This time she was really gone. I returned to my office and sat at my desk. The house was completely silent now, empty. Just me and the weight of what I'd built and destroyed in a single night. I opened my laptop and initiated a video call. Blaze's face appeared on screen after 2 rings, still at his London office despite the late hour there, 5 in the morning, UK time. "Dad," he said, "I wasn't expecting another call tonight. I wanted to check on you," I said. "Make sure you're okay after everything." Blaze studied me through the screen. "I should be asking you that. Are you okay, Dad? Really okay?" I looked at my son's face on the video screen and saw Cora's eyes, same shape, same steady gaze, and realized my youngest son had survived everything Jacinta destroyed and rebuilt himself stronger than the system that tried to break him. "I'm tired," I admitted, "but I'm okay." "You did what you had to do," Blaze said quietly. "What Mom would have wanted you to do." The mention of Cora hung in the air between us. "Your mother," I started, then stopped, started again. "She would have been proud of you, Blaze, the way you handled the scholarship theft, working your way through university, building a career in London on your own merit." Blaze's expression softened. "She helped me through that first year, you know. After the scholarship disappeared, I was working 3 jobs, drowning in student loans, convinced I'd have to drop out." "I didn't know that," I said. "She called me every Sunday," Blaze continued. "Sent care packages with grocery store gift cards hidden in the boxes. Never said anything about it, just kept me going. Reminded me that building something real takes time." I felt something crack in my chest. "She never told me she was doing that." "She knew you would have sent money," Blaze said. "But she wanted me to learn the difference between help and rescue, between support and dependency." I looked at the framed photo of Cora on my desk, taken 20 years ago at Blaze's 3rd birthday party, her smile, genuine eyes bright before the fraud consumed her. "Come home next year," I said. For the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever works for your schedule, just come home. Blaze nodded slowly. I'll come home, Dad. I promise. It's been too long. 7 years, I said. 7 years, he confirmed. But next year will be different. The scholarship money is coming back right. That means I can afford the flights without died. The money is coming back, I confirmed. Every dollar plus interest. And then I'll be there, Blaze said. Atlanta for the holidays. We'll do it properly. The way we used to when Mom was... He stopped. We both knew how that sentence ended. When Mom was alive, I finished for him. We'll honor her memory by doing it right. Blaze smiled a real smile, warm and genuine. She'd like that. The video call ended a few minutes later. Blaze had work to finish before the London office opened. I had an empty mansion to sit in as the new year approached. I sat alone in my office looking at Cora's photo on the desk. For the first time since her death 5 years ago, I smiled back at her picture. We protected them, I whispered to the photograph. Just like you asked. I set the photo of Cora back on my desk, the smile still lingering on my face. Protected. After 5 years, the promise was kept. I stood at the bottom watching. She reached the landing, then the final flight. Her footsteps echoed against marble. She reached the entrance hall floor and stopped 3 feet from me. We looked at each other, a lifetime of history compressed into a single moment of silence. The black trash bags rustled as she shifted her weight. Dad, she said quietly. I nodded. Jacinta. She looked past me toward the front door. Cold December night, visible through the sidelight windows, then back at me. Do you regret it? She asked. Any of it? I considered the question. 5 years of planning, 1 night of exposure, Langston arrested, her inheritance gone, the family protected but fractured. No, I said, I don't regret it. She nodded slowly, processing. But I'm sad, I continued. Sad that this was the only way to protect the family from you. Sad that your mother's letter wasn't enough to change your path. Sad that it took a heart attack and an automated system to stop 14 years of theft. Jacinta's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Yeah, she whispered. Me too. We stood in silence for another moment. She adjusted her grip on the trash bags. I should go. I nodded. She walked past me toward the front door bags, rustling with each step. She reached for the handle, then paused. Where will you go? I asked. She shrugged. Henrietta offered her guest room, until I figure things out. My sister, always trying to save people. And that's good, I said. Jacinta pulled the door open. Cold air rushed into the entrance hall, carrying the smell of December frost and dead leaves. I watched my daughter walk into the freezing night carrying trash bags, and realized this was the last time I'd ever see her as my daughter. From this moment forward, she was just someone who used to live in my house. Someone who'd stolen from family and paid the price. The relationship we'd had, however, damaged, however strained, died the moment she stepped across that threshold. She walked onto the porch, down the steps, onto the circular driveway. Her footsteps crunched on gravel, growing fainter. She didn't look back. I stood in the doorway watching until she disappeared into the darkness beyond the estate lights. No car waiting, no driver, no plan beyond her aunt's guest room, and whatever came after suspended sentence and probation. The cold air kept rushing in. I finally closed the door. The soft click echoed through the empty entrance hall. I returned to the living room. Norwood stood by the projection screen, tablet in hand. At a final administrative summary, he said, his voice pure efficiency. I sat in the leather chair I'd occupied during the confrontation. Norwood remained standing. Midtown Mansion title transferred to Vanguard Holdings. As of 9 p.m. tonight, he began. Court-ordered restructuring of Buckhead estate ownership will finalize within 60 days. Melvin Garrison's Oak Creek Trust pension, full reimbursement dispersing within 30 days from Vanguard accounts. His voice reduced 5 years of planning and 1 night of exposure to bullet points on legal documents. Norwood's administrative efficiency was remarkable. Midtown Mansion, Buckhead restructuring, pension reimbursement, FBI files, suspended sentences, human tragedy, and family destruction, compressed into neat legal categories. FBI accepted the Langston Valentine case file. Norwood continued. Wire fraud, embezzlement, securities violations. Agent Blackwell estimates arraignment within 2 weeks. He'll likely plead out given the evidence volume. And Jacinta, I asked. Conditional suspended sentence as negotiated. Norwood confirmed. 18 months suspended, 3 years probation, mandatory financial counseling, community service. If she completes terms without violation, criminal record gets sealed. If she violates, full prosecution with 14 counts. I nodded. Blaze Webb's scholarship reimbursement processes through Vanguard Holdings Educational Fund, Norwood said. 82,000 plus accumulated interest. Should hit his account within 48 hours. Good, I said. Property equity restorations for affected family members, documentation complete. Tate Morgan will handle individual notifications and reimbursement schedules starting January 2nd. Norwood swiped his tablet screen. That completes the primary objectives. Everything else is administrative cleanup and court scheduling. He looked up from the tablet. It's done then, all of it. I looked around the living room, projection screen dark, coffee table clear, 20 chairs removed and returned to storage. No evidence of the confrontation except the weight of what happened here. Yes, I said, it's done. Norwood powered down his tablet and slid it into his briefcase. He extended his hand. I stood and shook it. Thank you, Norwood, I said, for everything. It's 5 years, he replied. Most complex estate protection case I've ever handled, and the most necessary. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the entrance hall. I followed. At the front door, he paused. Good night, Clyde. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, I replied. The door closed behind him. His car started, headlights sweeping across the windows as he pulled away down the driveway. I stood alone in the entrance hall, completely alone for the first time all night. I walked back to the living room and crossed to the wine cabinet, pulled out a bottle of Bordeaux, the same brand I'd been drinking for 5 years during planning sessions. Late nights with Norwood and Tate reviewing evidence and building the system. Glass after glass of this exact vintage while designing justice. I opened the bottle and poured a glass. The wine caught the light deep red and perfectly aged. For 5 years I'd poured this wine to fuel revenge planning, to sharpen strategy, to maintain focus while building an automated system that would expose my daughter's fraud. But tonight I poured it for a different reason. Not to plan, not to strategize. Not to design or build or scheme, just to drink, just to exist in the quiet aftermath of completed justice. I sat in the leather chair, glass in hand, and listened to the silence. The system was complete, the exposure finished, the family protected, and I had nothing left to do but sit, drink, and wait for morning. I finished the glass of Bordeaux and set it on the side table. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11:30, half an hour until the new year. I walked to the kitchen, opened the wine refrigerator, and pulled out a bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon Vintage 2015. I'd been saving it for something. Tonight seemed appropriate. I popped the cork, poured a glass, and carried it to the balcony doors. The cold December wind hit my face the moment I stepped outside. Sharp, clean, the kind of cold that makes you aware you're alive. I stood at the railing looking across Atlanta. The city sparkled with distant celebrations, rooftop parties, restaurant gatherings, families counting down to midnight. Clear sky above, stars visible despite the light pollution. This was the first time in 5 years I'd stepped outside just to breathe, not to plan, not to strategize, just to exist in a moment without purpose beyond the moment itself. My phone buzzed. Video call from London. I answered. Blaze's face filled the screen, champagne glass in his hand. Office lights dim behind him. You made it to the balcony, he said. First time outside in hours, I replied. Needed air. How does it feel? He asked. Being on the other side of it, I considered the question. Strange, empty, peaceful. Blaze nodded. To endings and beginnings. I raised my champagne glass toward the phone screen. To what you built in London, to surviving what tried to break you. Blaze raised his glass. To you, Dad. To protection and justice. I tapped my glass against the phone screen. The sound was absurd crystal against silicon, but the gesture felt right. Father and son clinking glasses virtually across 5,000 miles. Atlanta and London celebrating the same moment in different time zones. There's 35 minutes until your midnight, I said. 5 hours until mine. Strange how time works, Blaze said. We're in the same moment, but different hours. I took a sip of champagne, cold, crisp, perfect. Then I glanced down at the street below the balcony and saw her. Jacinta stood beside a parked Uber, rummaging through one of the black trash bags. Streetlight illuminated her face as she searched for something, phone charger maybe, or a wallet. Light rain had started falling, making her hair stick to her forehead. She looked lost, soaked, desperate. I watched my daughter search through trash bags in the rain and felt exactly what Cora must have felt, writing that suicide letter 5 years ago. The crushing weight of watching someone you love destroy themselves and being powerless to stop it. No triumph, no schadenfreude, just quiet, aching sadness. "Dad!" Blaze's voice pulled me back. "You okay?" She's down there," I said quietly. "In the rain, looking for something in those trash bags." Blaze was silent for a moment. Then, "Do you want to—" "No," I interrupted. "This is her path now. I can't walk it for her." Jacinta found whatever she was searching for, a phone charger, I think, and climbed into the Uber. The car pulled away from the curb taillights fading down the street. Gone. I looked away from the street up at the sky instead. The rain fell on Buckhead Estate like the final credits of a movie nobody wanted to watch, washing away the year, the exposure, the confrontation, leaving only what remains when the drama ends and real life resumes. "Are you okay, Dad?" Blaze asked again. "Really?" I took a breath. "I'm missing your mother. Wish she could see this moment. See you thriving in London. See the family protected. See that the 5 years of planning actually worked." Blaze's expression softened. "She does see it. Somehow she does." "You think so?" "I know so," Blaze said. "She left you that letter because she knew you'd do exactly what you did. She trusted you to finish what she couldn't." I looked at the champagne glass in my hand. Cora and I used to toast New Year's on this same balcony every year for 3 decades. The tradition died with her, until tonight. "She would have been proud of you," I said, "of how you rebuilt yourself after the scholarship theft, of who you became without shortcuts or stolen money. She would have been proud of you too," Blaze replied, "for protecting the family, for doing the hard thing nobody else could do." Distant voices echoed from neighboring estates. The countdown was starting somewhere. 10, 9, 8. I held the phone up so Blaze could see the Atlanta skyline behind me. 765. Blaze held his glass higher, visible on screen. 432. I looked up at the sky, not down where Jacinta had disappeared. One happy new year. Fireworks exploded across Atlanta's midnight sky. Gold cascades, silver spirals, red bursts that painted the clouds. The concussions echoed off buildings' rolling thunder of celebration. "Happy New Year, Dad," Blaze said through the phone. "Then Happy New Year, son," I replied. "Happy new beginning." More fireworks burst overhead. The champagne glass felt light in my hand. The rain had stopped, leaving only clean, cold air and the smell of sulfur from the fireworks. I stood on the balcony watching colors explode and fade against the darkness, thinking of Cora, of Blaze rebuilding his life in London, of 5 years of patient planning, of one night of necessary exposure, of Jacinta walking into rain with trash bags and uncertain future. I thought about what freedom actually means. Not victory, not revenge, not even justice, really. Freedom is letting go of the weight you've been carrying. The plans, the schemes, the protection systems, the constant vigilance against the people who should have been trustworthy. Freedom is standing on a balcony at midnight with champagne in one hand and your son's face on a screen in the other, watching fireworks burst and fade and realizing you don't have to do anything except breathe. For the first time since Cora died 5 years ago, I could breathe without carrying the weight of what comes next. The fireworks continued, gold and silver and red and blue painting the Atlanta sky with temporary beauty. I raised my glass to them, to endings, to beginnings, to protection and loss and the quiet peace that comes when you've done everything you could, and there's nothing left to do but rest. "I love you, son," I said to the phone. "I love you too, Dad," Blaze replied. "Get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." The call ended. I stood alone on the balcony watching the last fireworks fade. Then I walked back inside, closed the balcony doors, and went to bed. And to you listening to my story, remember this: justice and peace are not the same thing. Don't make my mistake of carrying the weight alone for 5 years. When I discovered the depth of my daughter's crimes, I chose to build a system in silence rather than confront her directly. I told myself I was protecting the family, but really, I was protecting myself from the pain of that conversation. The truth is, family betrayal cuts deeper than any other kind because it comes from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Here's what I learned through all of this: family betrayal doesn't give you the right to become someone you're not. Yes, I exposed the fraud. Yes, I protected the family's assets and got justice for those who were stolen from. But I also lost my daughter in the process. Was it worth it? I believe God put me through this trial so I could understand that sometimes protecting your family means protecting them from each other, even when it breaks your heart. The lesson isn't about revenge. It's about knowing when love requires you to say no, to set boundaries, to choose truth over comfort. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. What would you have done in my situation? If you know someone dealing with family betrayal or difficult choices about loyalty versus justice, please share this story with them. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to Revenge Dad. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention mean more than you know. Final note: certain details in this story have been fictionalized for privacy and storytelling purposes. The core lesson about family justice and difficult choices, that part is real.